I'm Michelle Feltus. Thank you all for joining me today. I'm one of the faculty at Stanford doing global emergency medicine. I'm the current fellowship co-director for Global EM. I'm also the immediate past chair of the Global EM Fellowship Consortium, which is how I got tagged to organize this. Today, we're focusing on Global EM for residents and students. This is a kind of joint organizational effort with RAMS and the Longitudinal Global Health Curriculum for EM residents. We're going to start this off just with a kind of basic introduction to Global EM. This is the only part that will have slides. I'm not trying to bore you all with a long PowerPoint. And we're starting it off with, like I said, just the short presentation, and then we'll go into introductions and then go into the Q&A session. So hopefully you guys have questions to ask. So starting off, what is global health? This is one of those things that we tend to talk about without necessarily having a definition of. Broadly speaking, I like the definition from CUGH, where it's an area of study, research, or practice with a goal to improve the well-being of people and the planet through education, research, service, and advocacy. As you can see, that is giant. That covers everything from climate change to epidemics, et cetera. When we focus it on emergency medicine or global emergency medicine, it's really focused to strengthen emergency care delivery in all settings. And that ranges from very rural areas of high-income countries to urban settings and to lower and middle-income countries. I like the framework of emergency care systems from the WHO. And so you can see that the overall aspect of emergency care systems is massive. It starts at the scene, it goes from getting the patient to the hospital, whether that's in an ambulance or other transport system, and then ending up at a facility where they can take care of the patient and have access to definitive care. So that's something we tend to take for granted in high-income countries and cities, where we can dial 911 and immediately get access to an ambulance that arrives generally in a shorter amount of time and then get transported to the appropriate hospital. In areas without strong systems like this, that doesn't always happen. And so the complexities of developing this as a framework and developing this when it isn't in place already is massive and can go on a lot of different directions. You also need to think about what happens if there's a massive stress to the system. So something like a natural disaster or a humanitarian crisis, a conflict, something like that. You also have to think about how this affects that part as well. So this kind of goes into the different areas of global EM. We have it covered a lot of different aspects. And so we tend to think about it in two big buckets. One is capacity development or systems development or system strengthening. Those are like commonly used phrases. And then the other bucket is humanitarian response. There's a lot of overlap with this because things that will strengthen a system's ability to respond to a disaster will also generally strengthen their ability to just do general patient care delivery. But people tend to think about them as this is the area that I focus in. For instance, I'm a medical education person. So I tend to focus on the education aspect of capacity development. So that's EM residency training, med student training, EMT training, et cetera. You also have things that are more like policy. So that's working with the ministries of health or the WHO, for instance, kind of like large groups in order to set up the system, kind of work on the massive system level. And then you have clinical care. So it's like more direct patient care component. Humanitarian response focuses a lot on disaster response, so responding to earthquakes or viral epidemic outbreaks, but it also hedges into refugee care as well. It also had a big focus on that as a response to many things like conflict or famine or natural disasters. When we think of careers in global EM, which is more of what we're thinking about today, we think of a couple of big areas. The thing is, a lot of people will actually flip back and forth between these. So I'm in academia, but a lot of academics work with the WHO in different aspects on things like the basic emergency care, the course, the BEC course. There's going to be a lot of research focus on that, but there also may be research happening in the humanitarian response sphere as well. And people will flip back and forth between these. For the other big career options, it tends to be some people will focus a lot more on policy. So that's the WHO, Ministry of Health component. And then also other people that do global EM will really only look at humanitarian response. So those are going to be people that work, generally do community EM, sometimes academic EM, and then will deploy for Doctors Without Borders, for instance, for the MSF response, or respond to disasters as needed. One thing that I did want to make sure to bring up is the Global EM Academy with SAEM. This is a great opportunity for students and residents to connect with mentors and get a lot of networking done. So I wanted to highlight, since SAM is coming up shortly, that the GMA meeting is going to be on Thursday, May 15th. All students and residents are welcome. And I think a lot of the people from this panel are actually going to be there in person. So if you want a chance to set up a time to meet with somebody, this could be a great opportunity to do that. And I also wanted to highlight this website. So the fellowship is one of the big ways that people enter into global EM, especially into academic careers. We'll kind of talk about why that can be. I can talk about that a little bit in a minute, but this website is kind of the entry to that application process right now. It also houses a lot of information on the different programs. So many, if not, I would say it's like the vast majority of academic programs that are doing a lot of work in global EM have a fellowship. Not all, but a lot of them. And so there's going to be links to each program where they can describe their what work they do. A lot of fellowships will focus on specific areas, like some will have more of a humanitarian response focus, some will have more system strengthening focus, that kind of thing. And so you can use this website to kind of help you narrow your look, as well as if you're interested in specific area of work, you can also use this to find places to email people for mentors as well. We have two moderators, Dr. Caitlin Rowe and Dr. Manisha Saha. They are current residents that are helping moderate this. And then we have 5 panelists. So Dr. Klosner, Dr. Cortez, Dr. Schmitzberger, Dr. Torrey, and Dr. Robarczyk. I am not going to give your own bios for you. I will let you all do that yourselves, but we will get into the introductions shortly. I'm going to go ahead and put up this with my email address now before I end this chat and the PowerPoint. All right. We go ahead and stop sharing. And then we can go ahead and do our panelist introductions. I'm going to start it with the order that is now my own order because nobody else can see my PowerPoint, but I'll start it with that order. Dr. Klosner.
Hey, I'm Lee Klossner. I'm one of the chief presidents at WashU in St. Louis, and I'm the current RAMS president for SAEM. I actually came to medicine after working in global public health at the CDC and always knew that was going to be a focus of my career moving forward and as I planned out my academic career. So that's a little about me.
Dr. Cortez.
Hello, my name is Emma Cortez. I'm an emergency medicine and family medicine physician. I trained at Jefferson Northeast, did a combined program. I graduated in 2023 and then was an attending for a year on Native American reservations in South Dakota and Arizona, and also doing primary care in Philadelphia. Currently, I am the Global Emergency Medicine Fellow at Brown, and hope to continue doing academic emergency medicine with the focus on Indigenous communities and women's health.
Hi. Hey, Lauren Schmitzberger. I'm at the University of Michigan. I was trained here. I'm faculty here, obviously in emergency medicine. My background's going into global emergency medicine is mostly in the humanitarian side. Been working for many years in conflict regions, which has been my focus on both the research side with some funding from the DoD and WHO, and also humanitarian on the NGO side. I've been the medical director for Global Response Medicine, and I'm on the board of a small NGO, Refugee Relief International. Been working internationally for many years in addition to the other stuff. So happy to chat.
Dr. Torrey.
I'm Kristen DeTore. I am one of the EM physicians at Vanderbilt in Nashville, Tennessee. I fell into global work just because I really loved to do service work when I was growing up as a teenager and into college. I never imagined having an academic career doing this kind of work. I thought I would do some humanitarian relief work or nothing to the degree of what I've done. I'm currently the Global EM Fellowship Director at Vanderbilt, as well as our Division Director. And I work primarily in Georgetown, Guyana, where we started an EM residency training program back in 2010. So I continue to support them with all their projects and educational initiatives, and then work with a lot of colleagues within my same division that have helped advance emergency medicine and pre-hospital care in Guyana. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And then Dr. Barczyk.
Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Rubarczyk. I am currently the Fellowship Director at the University of Pennsylvania. And our fellowship is focused primarily on education and training and building capacity in that way in resource-denied settings. So happy to chat more about that program for those of you who are interested. I'm also one of the past presidents or chairs of the GEMFC, the Global Emergency Medicine Fellowship Consortium. Michelle was mentioning that group as well, so I'm happy to chat about the Fellowship Consortium and kind of how things work with all the fellowships together. And then I'm this year also wearing another hat. I will be the GEMA president coming up in the next couple of weeks here as the transition goes to the new EXCO with GEMA. So I have my hands in a couple different pots, so happy to answer questions about any of those things. And we would love to see all of you at that GEMA meeting. So I just want to reiterate that. Emma Cortez here has put together a great agenda for that business meeting. She's been in charge of that. And so we are really looking forward to the meeting and seeing all of you there. So happy to chat more about any of those things. And thanks so much for having me today.
Does anybody have any questions they want to drop in the chat or unmute yourselves to ask? If not, I've got a list of things, but I think it would be better coming from all of the attendees.
Hi, I have a question. My name's Eki. I'm a current PGY2 at University of Chicago. I think one or two of you may have touched on this, but I was wondering if y'all who are fellowship directors and then also the current fellow, if y'all could touch on what your main focus is or niche within Global EM, if that applies to how you structure your fellowship.
Megan or Christian, do either of you want to take that one?
Sure. I can chime in. So that's an excellent question. And I think that will really determine where you look to go for fellowship if that's something you're interested in. Michelle said that summary page on the SAEM website is really helpful to be able to see what all the different fellowships offer. So, for example, our fellowship primarily is focused on medical education and providing care in low resource settings. But we also have some sub projects with ultrasound teaching, pre-hospital care development. And so it really is, if you know what area you're interested in, trying to look through the different programs to see whose fellowships have an emphasis on that. I would say we are not emphasized on research. We have a pretty big lack there. And so if that was your big thing that you were looking for, I would encourage you to find one of the bigger hospitals or different hospitals that emphasize on research. But yeah, I think the website is really helpful to be able to see what all the different programs offer.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate that our program too is very focused on education and training and building capacity in that way in resource denied settings. And then we also work primarily in just a couple different countries. So Pakistan and Botswana are two of our big areas. So when you're looking through that list of fellowships, one, think about, again, as Dr. Tori said, what you really want to focus on. Is it education and training? Is it policy? Is it research? Is it humanitarian disaster response? Some of them are focused on each one of those. Some of them are more broad where you can kind of dip your hand into each one of those things. So keep that in mind. And then is there a specific area of the world that you're interested in, certain countries that people are working in? Keep that in mind. And if you don't see it on the website, feel free to reach out. Any fellowship director, I'm sure, or current fellows that are listed on the website would be happy to answer questions. And if you're saying, hey, I like your program, are you guys working in this area of the world? Get those questions answered before, it comes up time to put in applications and have interviews and stuff like that. You're, interviewing the programs probably even more than they're interviewing you at this point. So you need to make sure that the fellowship that you want to join is really what you want to do and where you want to take your career going forward.
And I would say don't eliminate any programs just because you don't see what you're looking for. If there's a specific country or region or hospital that you want to work with or a person you want to work with, I think fresh ideas and new ideas are always welcome. And just because we're not doing it doesn't mean we can't. And so it's definitely worth reaching out if you have a particular interest.
I'm seeing quite a few questions in the chat, so thank you all for putting these in there. I think before I move on to those, Emma, Dr. Cortez, do you want to chat maybe a little bit about how you made your decision to join your current program, since that seems like what this is going after?
Yeah, I agree with what was said. Every program is very different, and it will really depend on what your interests are and maybe if there's somebody you're interested in working with, the kind of mentorship you're looking for, whether or not you want somebody there to really guide you every single step of the way. Maybe you already have a little bit more experience. You want a little bit more autonomy to do either research or you already have work that you're doing. That will also help you determine what kind of residency you're looking at. I'm sorry, fellowship. For me, I knew I wanted to do an MPH as well. So that also helped guide me to pick which fellowships I was looking at, because I was looking at which program supported that. And when I was looking, one of the things that was important to me was, again, the faculty and the interest and work that they were doing. I think for me, as someone who comes from like a dual specialty, I wear many hats. I'm also the founder and director of a nonprofit organization that works with migrant workers in New Jersey. And I was looking for a program that would give me space to do multiple different kinds of projects. And so that was how, thankfully I ended up at Brown working there. And then one of the things we're doing now, because exactly to Dr. Jatori's point earlier, I'm in the process of creating an affiliation with Brown and IHS Indian Health Services to start doing work in Pine Ridge, where I was working previously. I will start going as a fellow likely in the fall, and then soon we'll start having other faculty members and residents and fellows be able to go as well. So just because you don't see something doesn't mean that it can't happen and that there's not faculty already interested in it. So I would just reach out.
Thank you for that. Since you brought up the NPH, one of the questions is many fellowships come with an option to do an NPH as a fellow as well. In your experience, how helpful is that added credential? First, from a show of hands, who has an NPH? All right. I do not have an NPH, or Emma, does that mean you're working on one? Okay. I do not have an NPH. I have a master's in academic medicine. With the meta degree from USC. And so that's what I did as a fellow. And that was specifically because I wanted to do medical education. So those who do have an NPH, do you want to talk about how you found that useful or not?
I can go ahead. So I have an MSPH, which is a Master's of Science in Public Health. I actually started a PhD program in epidemiology and ABD in epidemiology. So I really thought originally after I finished undergrad, that was the path I would be taking. And then grant funding being what it is, my attending, I guess not my attending, my PhD supervisor was like, please take a little break. And so I ended up working in public health and then ultimately decided medicine would be a career for me. So my MSPH has been extremely helpful for me, especially if I think about like big data sets or how health affects a population. That's really what that Masters of Public Health is all about. Like, how do you take health from the individual level to the community level or to the state level to the global level? And I also did a lot of work in statistical analyses. And so now, like, I have my own IRB. I was able to do my own study design. I'm able to do my own statistics. I'm able to work a lot more independently, which I think, especially as you're getting started, and I think especially in the new funding landscape that we're looking at, especially in kind of like global work, being able to have skill sets where like you can do a lot of things yourself if you need is really important.
I will just quickly agree with that. So I have an MPH. I would say that, several of the classes that I took, especially like epi, biostats, all of that, just giving you some of those skills as again, yes, as the funding landscape changes and there's not as many grants administrators and financial folks to help you out maybe with some of that, or statisticians and stuff like that in departments. And so it's really helpful to be able to do at least some of the simple stuff on your own through taking those classes through the MPH. And then at least for me too, it was a really great way to network as well too. So I did my fellowship at the Harvard Brigham and Women's Hospital program. And so did the MPH at Harvard. And so it was a really great way to network with people and like think about people who are working in kind of the medicine, maybe adjacent space, not even like in emergency medicine or anything like that, but then networking out beyond, the small little niche that we have in emergency medicine. I would say it's kind of twofold. One, getting some skills, and two, the networking part of it as well too, depending on where you take your MPH. I will say though, to the point that has been said by other folks here, you don't necessarily need an MPH. It may be helpful to do a master's in medical education. It might be helpful to do an MBA. It might be helpful to do even like a JD. Like, and not all the fellowship programs will cover those things, but it's something to explore. Some of the fellowships are open to allowing you to do a different degree if you already have an MPH or you're wanting to go a little bit of a different direction. So that's a good conversation to have with the fellowship director, because they may be able to cover part of it or all of it of a different degree if you're really looking to going a specific direction in a specific niche.
Yeah, I would just say really quickly that I agree that, you don't have to have the MPH. For me, I think some people are coming into this work with experience in research already, and so maybe perhaps MPH isn't necessarily going to teach them that. But if somebody doesn't have a lot of experience doing research, the MPH is a really great way to guide you into that, to teach you some very foundational things like epidemiology, biostatistics, things of that nature. It really has given me a lot of a different perspective on research that I really appreciate. I'm really happy that I started the MPH program. It's changed the way that I see a lot of the work, and especially for humanitarian work, I think it's very helpful. I'm currently taking the Harvard Humanitarian Response course right now. I'm actually here right now in Boston, and it focuses on humanitarian response and going through all the systems. It really does kind of it's been very helpful to have that public health background. It's been helpful in seeing all of the different clusters and looking what that looks like in real life.
I think I'm just going to add, as somebody who did the less traditional med ed degree, I initially started off as an MD PhD student. And so I did 3 years in the lab. So I had plenty of exposure to a lot of the research stuff. I know I've taken like a stats class from that. It wasn't a formal epidemiology class, but there was like a class that talked about that as part of that PhD work, even though I didn't finish the PhD. And so when I was making the decision about what I wanted to do, I basically looked at the different course listings and was like, what would I do with these different things? And the med ed degree is what sounded the most interesting, and the one that I didn't think I'd be able to get in other ways quite as easily. Whereas I know I can do an epidemiology class, and I know that those are easily available. It's not necessarily as easy to get advanced training in med ed or med ed research. And so that's why I made that decision. But it's also, like, as multiple people have said, it's worth having the conversation about what you would do with it before you decide to do it just because it's recommended or required. I don't really love the idea of anybody doing something just because they're supposed to, as opposed to because they're going to use it. We're no longer about checkboxes. We're supposed to be about kind of making this fit your career. And so it's always better to have that conversation about what you would do with it. And so if an NPH is not something you would necessarily use as well in the type of work you want to do, then maybe something else fits better. Next question is travel a necessary part of being involved in global health? Is there a way to be involved remotely? And what are those ways? I think this answer is going to be very different post-COVID than it would have been a few years ago. How do you get funding for travel if needed? And how do you find opportunities for travel for humanitarian efforts? Who would like to start?
I can speak to that a little bit. That's going to be a yes and no kind of thing. There's going to be a lot of work to be done if you don't travel, but a lot of the fun and why people do this is because they like to travel. So two-edged kind of thing. You're going to want to travel to really understand the communities, the challenges, and to encompass the global aspect of this. There is, however, a lot of work that needs to be done on the back end in terms of, the academic work, the thinking work, and the work that actually moves things forward on the back end. We've all kind of realized that the hands-on work is fun, but may not be the actually most impactful work you could be doing. So having the ability to stay back and work on that is fine. I do encourage somebody who doesn't like to travel is probably not the most fun, but we've all been through COVID and realized sometimes you can't travel. And there are alternatives to actually be productive in this field if you're not able to travel. Getting the funding for that, there's the obvious, like getting linked in with an NGO, getting linked in with a fellowship program that has funding for these things. Self-funded is obviously an option, but a little less sustainable over the long term. There's grant funding, at least, there's some grant funding from foundations these days that may make this possible, but it's a little bit more tricky to do. I feel like as you progress through your career, the travel funding is actually the easier part to get funding for. It's the getting time away, being able to get everything else funded that you need to do. So your own personal travel is usually more of an afterthought. It's the getting local funding for your own time, other people's time, equipment, everything else that you might need to implement the projects.
I think there's also a component of this, as with the climate change concern. There's also a question of how much travel do we actually need to do in order to successfully implement our projects? I think it's a bit less than we saw pre-COVID. I don't think we need to have everything happen in person, but it is incredibly hard to get a good sense of what your partner is actually looking for and really needs without having at least a little bit of in-person time there. It may not be the full, like every other month for 2 weeks at a time that many of us were doing pre-COVID. It may not be quite that intense, but I think it's irreplaceable to get that in-person feeling for this.
I
Any other thoughts?
completely agree. And you also just build a foundation of trust when you are in person, face to face, working together. And like Dr. Schmitzberger said, an understanding of what medicine is actually like, where you are trying to have a project or have a partnership. I think COVID really did teach a lot of us that you don't have to be on the ground all the time, but building that foundation first is essential to be able to continue things from a distance. There are many opportunities to do research, teach virtual teaching, creating protocols, educational courses, like a lot of things you can do from home, like without travel. But I think that kind of relationship and foundation is essential, which usually requires some in person, a component of in person.
Thank you.
And I agree with, I think somebody mentioned most of the funding for travel. If you're going to an established fellowship program, there will likely be, there's already a budget in place for travel. That depends on where you go. But for most fellowships, I think there is some sort of budget in place already to provide the coverage for that travel. It's just going to differ from where place to place.
Also add for fellowships, part of it is also making sure you have your shifts covered. And so I think that's the part as an attending, as a faculty, that's actually the harder part is we don't have protected time anymore. So that is a big part of where we need to either work more during the months we're not traveling or shift stack or something like that in order to get that space to travel. And that can be the more challenging. That's why I think from the faculty side, that's the more challenging aspect of the travel component is more the time, getting the time away. I definitely agree with the comment about providing funding in a fair and ethical way. That's why there should be some kind of clear answer to this, like how this is going to work. Also, all fellowships should have some amount of like professional development funds, and it should be something where that should be the kind of funding of last resort for your trips. That should be something where you may need to do it, but it may not be every trip you do as a fellow should be coming out of that bucket because travel's expensive. Next question. What's a career in global EM look like without getting a fellowship?
Ooh, I can talk to that. It's like somebody planted this question. Perfect. Promise she's not a plant. I don't have a global EM fellowship. I did other graduate degrees, other things, and I came through this little bit of a lateral move. Again, as Dr. Feltus just said, the difficult part is you got to find a way to get your experience and your time covered. That is the most difficult thing as you progress through this, at least in the beginning, is finding projects is comparatively easy. There's a lot of need for projects that you can get involved in. Everybody's going to happily take your work, your effort, your excitement. The bigger problem is going to be who's going to give you time and dedicate, training to you while you're learning the ropes. Personally, I think an apprenticeship model can work. It's worked for me, learning from people who've done this before. There's certain benefits, certainly in a fellowship kind of process where you really have that structured environment. And there's no ability to truly fail because you have a lot of people that are invested in you succeeding in this path. If you can find a way other than this, I think it's very much doable. It just may be a little bit more difficult. Full disclosure, I did a different research-based fellowship that allowed me to, use some of that time to travel and use that as well. But finding a way to do so is more and more difficult. So think about how you would structure this and who you would have as a mentor that would then not be your program director because you don't have a program to actually learn things as you progress through, the learning phase of global EM.
Yeah, I'll just say really quickly, I think, having a year between when I started fellowship, I think having a mentor is probably one of the most important things, no matter where you are in your career. That's always going to be important. And having a good mentor can make all of the difference, especially, as a medical student or as a resident, you should be actively looking for a mentor because it will really help you in your career and your life.
I think I would also add, if you do not do a fellowship, you need to be very intentional about creating doing the networking side of it. That's one of the aspects of fellowship that is hard to replicate without that kind of formal structure. It's definitely doable, especially if you get involved in like NGOs or GMA or like ASIP International, like some kind of thing like that, where you can make those contacts in order to find the mentors that you would need. You just don't have it ready built in to to your to your job or to your career path the way that you would with a fellowship, but it's definitely still doable. Next question, we could discuss more about humanitarian initiatives versus academic development in programs. I see a lot of programs seem to focus on both, so just wondering how to tease through this.
Was the question just how to identify if a program is more academic focused on systems development, education versus a humanitarian relief option?
I think that it does say that programs seem to focus on both.
Mm.
So maybe trying to how to differentiate the different types, maybe.
I would love to learn how to do both because I have not been able to incorporate humanitarian relief into our division at all just because of scheduling difficulties. If somebody can do that would be great. I would love to learn.
I think the flip side is if you find a program that just does humanitarian and doesn't try to analyze and understand and measure impact, that's a bit of a red flag. So that's probably why you're finding so many that have both. It's because they do some amount of humanitarian, but they make sure to hopefully analyze their impact, which I think is very important.
And I think a lot of programs try to be a little bit well-rounded just because when you're doing a fellowship in global EM, like in order to truly understand global EM and the scope of global EM, you need to have a little bit of experience in each of those areas and in policy and education and training and systems development and humanitarian disaster response. And so I think a lot of programs try to give you like an element of each, but hopefully from their website or from talking to the fellowship directors or prior fellows, you can get a better sense on like what their primary focus is, what they really hone in on. But I agree. It is a bit of a red flag if there is a program or at least an institution somewhere that only primarily focuses on like one aspect of it and doesn't really try to think about it holistically.
And then the next question is on dual fellowships, for instance, global health and ultrasound. With the goal of creating sustainable teaching programs globally, programs can create the ability to do both. How do you find somebody that would do that? I'm probably the person that should answer this since I have fellows that have done both. Technically, I'm not a panelist, but I will still answer. This is more about the flexibility of the program and whether, like, how they are structured and whether the department is okay with this. I think a lot of individual fellowship directors would be happy to have the idea of doing both, but it's whether their department can make that work and has that kind of flexibility within their departmental structure. The way my program, I'm at Stanford, the way we did it, we had two like consecutive years, we had ultrasound fellows that basically wanted to do global health. And so they essentially did two fellowships in 3 years. So they added on an extra year in order to get a fellowship in the second one. And the way it just happened to be that they both started off as ultrasound and then went into global health. Some of this is both of them had the like required experience and their goals of what they wanted to do with the global health fellowship made sense. It wasn't like they were just trying to stick around for a year, like another year and something like that. It's something where if you have the intention up front and bring that up, then I think it makes sense. That this is a little more complicated because both ultrasound and global EM have a match process, and we don't right now have a way of doing a match in both, at least not as far as I've heard of anything from NRMP about this. So I think if you're looking to do both, then I would apply to places that have both fellowships for sure and bring that up when you're kind of making your rounds for the interview process. And I think it's kind of up to you whether you apply to global EM or apply to ultrasound. I think that's something that you can maybe decide offline or after having conversations with different fellowship directors at different programs. That's something where ultrasound may feel one way and global EM may feel a different way. So I think it's worth having the conversation with both sides.
I agree. And having the conversation early. So I know in my program, we've been talking about this for a couple of years because we have a really strong ultrasound program and we have a lot of ultrasound fellows that are interested in global EM and kind of vice versa. And our ultrasound director is actually pretty heavily invested in global EM work. He does a lot of work in Ghana. And so we've been talking about it for a couple of years. That being said, departments usually need a year or two to plan for something like this in terms of the budget and figuring out like adding another fellow onto the staff in terms of the number of hours for the department. And if there's a specific place, if you're like geographically constrained, and you're like, I really want to go here, I would start talking to those programs early if they don't mention that they have this kind of fellowship, because it may be possible, but it just takes a little bit of planning. And especially to even that year, we have to like put in for an extra match spot or something like that if we were going to do this like early on. That just really requires a lot of foresight, a lot of planning, and talking to folks early, I think. So
Especially because one has, you can be credentialed in ultrasound at the end, and work in a hospital as like their department ultrasound person, whereas Global EM, there's not like an official credential that you're obtaining.
Our program is pretty similar to Megan's, where our ultrasound division is a very global mindset. Two of our directors are also prior fellows, but it is difficult because the ultrasound is ACGME and we are non ACGME, which makes it a little bit tricky for departments to figure that out. So it is possible. The most notice is helpful. And then probably figuring out which one is like more what you want to do long term. Is your emphasis global or is it ultrasound? And how can you overlap those? But picking an emphasis might help you a little bit.
one quick thing I just want to bring up that Dr. Dottori just mentioned, the fact that global EM fellowships are not ACGME accredited. And for example, some other fellowships like ultrasound are. I know some people have like hesitation about that, about why you're not ACGME accredited, that kind of thing. One of the reasons why we're not is because as you can see, all the fellowship programs are very varied. 1 versus 2 years, and a focus on education versus humanitarian disaster response versus other things. And so by not being ACGME accredited, we've been able to keep it much more diverse in terms of the types of programs that are out there. So you can have that opportunity to go through and choose which program would be best for you. So don't take that as a negative. We do still try to have, very strict requirements in terms of protecting fellows and having like best standards, best practices outlined for the fellowships that are in the fellowship consortium. So that is still in place. And we just don't go after the ACGME accreditation just because we don't want to have to restrict and make basically all the fellowships uniform out there. Yeah.
And our fellowship still falls under GME guidance. So we abide by all of the house staff rules for our hospital. So it is still very streamlined. It's just we do have more flexibility, which is really nice.
Non-ACGME can also be financially beneficial to the fellow. So it's definitely a plus in many ways.
Yeah, the fellowships in joining the match in the last few years, most programs have now had to come under the umbrella of their GME offices a little bit more. And so that has provided like even more oversight, as Dr. Tutori said. Yeah.
And I think last question, most likely. I don't know if this officially will kick us out or anything, but the last question is for current residents who are wanting to do a global EM elective. Do any of the programs have formal global health pathways for interested residents and associated elective opportunities? Do you have any recommendations for finding global EM elective if our home program doesn't offer any formal opportunities or have strong established relationships in the global health community?
I feel like this is a great time to plug the GMA meeting again at the annual meeting. So just kind of as a resident who is at a program that doesn't have global health, I've still been able to do a lot of global health work in residency, and I met all of my mentors in global EM via SAEM. I just showed up to the GMA meeting and I was like, hi, my program doesn't have a global EM and I'm looking for a mentor. And I was like that direct about it. And people will step up and help you. I think one thing to kind of remember about being interested in global EM is that most programs don't have a global EM fellowship. So all of the people that kind of work in this arena are extremely used to, number one, it's a collaborative field anyway. But, secondly, like most residents don't have a home program. And so people are very used to working across institutions. I will say that if you're looking at planning for something next spring, you've got a lot of lead time, which is great. But the place that I would start first actually is your home GME office. So for me to have traveled with a professor who was at an institution that wasn't mine, and therefore to be under the supervision of someone who wasn't at my home GME, there's a lot of legal paperwork that has to get signed in order for you to keep getting credits for the stuff that you're doing while you're abroad to get credit for your electives. And so there's like a legal process that your home GME will have to go through with the other program, like wherever your mentor is going to be with them. And you will need lead time for that. So I think if you already know you're interested in this and when, I would go ahead and talk to your home GME, see what's the kind of paperwork that I'm going to have to get together and what is the lead time for that. And then, as Michelle has put in the chat, the GMA meeting is on May 15th at 11 a.m. to 12:50, and you should go. And you should talk to everyone, and you should meet some really great people who will be happy to mentor you. And also get a hold of the program for the annual meeting and just go through it. See whose research you're interested in. Go to their talk. Ask them about their talk. Ask them if they're looking for someone to mentor. And that's the approach I took, and it's worked out really well for me.
Yeah, I'll just say, I agree, you need to be direct. And people will be happy to work with you if you are if you come with enthusiasm and you want to do work and coming to global EM or global health in general to want to work because it's a lot easier to not do global health. I think if people see that you're enthusiastic and that you want to work hard and you're willing to show up and do extra work than you're actually being expected to do in residency, then that goes a long way and people will really go out of their way to help you if they see that you're passionate like that.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. The clip I put on of the website does have the accurate dates for the match timeline or for the Global EM timeline. But thank you, Dr. Barczyk, for putting that in there. I will say the fellowship application due date is a little bit variable between programs. Most of them are going to be either end of September or sometime in October. The actual match, the date that the rank list has to be submitted is November 5th with the actual match date November 19th. I think a lot of people will end up having meetings at ASAP, though ASAP is super early this year. It's like early September, so early. So that may or may not be as useful as it has been in prior years, just because the timeline is usually a little bit later of like the timing of actual interviews for that. And then I do want to also add that I think if you can't go to the SAEM meeting, going to the GMFC website, the one that I put in the chat and showed the website for it, to find people to cold email is absolutely okay. I think most fellowship directors get emails like that at least a couple of times a year. I've had multiple meetings just like randomly at ASAP or SAEM with people that have emailed me asking for advice. And that is, I think, something like all of us are happy to do.
And I was going to say one other way is most residency program directors have a friend somewhere in the world that does global work. And so if you just reach out to your direct program director, they can likely get you connected to somebody in the nation who can help move that forward for you.
Any last minute questions anybody wants to put in the last couple of minutes?
I agree. I was going to say definitely following ASEP, International M, and then SAEM, being in GMA are all ways that you will see. You also see opportunities. I went to the Philippines because of an opportunity that was posted in the, one of the ASEP emails that went out. That's also, joining these groups and talking to these people, being in these conversations, these opportunities will arise.
Similar opportunities get sent out on GMA as well. So it is something that's like, it's super common to have somebody like send something and be like, hey, I have an option for a resident, especially somebody who's doing, sometimes that's more often at places that are not super academic. So they're more likely to send it out to like the giant listserv to get access to that resident or student pool. You can also reach out to the med school as well. The med school also, even as a resident, the med school will know where their students have gone for any kind of global health trip. And so they may also have contacts with that too. It doesn't cost anything to be part of GMAT once you're already part of SAM. And I don't think ASAP International is an extra fee as well. I don't remember that being an extra fee. So I think once you've already are part of like a member of these organizations, like you might as well be on the email list. I will say if you do cold email people, make sure you respond to their emails in a timely fashion or have an email like auto reply up, like I'm on an ICU rotation. So people know to be like, oh, okay, you'll dig out of email when you are no longer working 80 to 100 hours a week. All right. It also makes me super happy that so many people joined this. Thank you all so much for joining us. I put my email in the chat as well, and it was on the last slide that I showed. So if you don't see it, if you don't see the chat when you're looking at this as a recording, you can go ahead and find it there. And if you have questions for one of our panelists and don't have their email immediately available, you can also just email me and I'm happy to get you in contact with people. All right. Looks like all the emails are getting dropped. All right. Thank you all so much. Thanks to our panelists for joining and thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, everybody.